Hello everyone, welcome to this week's GT Sport Daily Race C Race and Strategy Guide. Week 50 takes us to Brands Hatch Grand Prix circuit and we are in the Group 4 machinery and we have some fairly interesting settings for this one. So 13 laps to get round, so a decent length of race. Tyre wear at times 6, fuel at times 2. It's just the racing medium tyres that are available. This is the important bit though, we have the return of the mandatory pit stop. Do remember that the tyre change is not required. As for BOP, damage, slipstream and rolling star, all as you would expect. So let's get into that all important pit stop info. It is the kind of critical information for this race. Whenever we've got the mandatory pit stop, the big question is how long does it take to change the tyres versus not changing the tyres, and then we'll take a look at how that kind of plays out within the real world. So first up we have the pit stop here without changing the tyres. Stop duration coming in at 1.6 seconds. When it's all said and done, that amounts to 8.8 seconds lost on the racetrack, so very short indeed, and that's going to play a kind of pivotal role as well in your decision making. Next up we have the tyre change. How long does it take us to put on a fresh set of tyres if we decide to do that? Stop duration coming in at 4 seconds. Overall pit loss 11.2 seconds. 2.4 seconds more to change the tyres. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in these kind of races there is exceptionally fine margins at play, and 2.4 seconds is maybe something you cannot afford to give up. But with the tyre wear being at times 6 and it being the medium tyres, it may not be as clear cut a decision as it has been some of the previous races with the mandatory pit stop not to change the tyres. But let's look at that next. Let's see how the lap times play out and basically discover whether, you know, are we going to be better off with a fresh set of tyres, or is the 2.4 seconds an unnecessary loss that we don't really need to contend with. So the first run here is not changing the tyres. We're in the Toyota 86 and you may well have noticed we made a little bit of a boo-boo as we cross the line to start the last lap here, because in my kind of just trying to put in consistent lap times, focusing on apexes and exits, I completely forgot to actually make that mandatory pit stop. So if this had been the real world in sport mode, we would be looking at a 1 second penalty. So that is something make sure you do not do. Do not make the schoolboy error that I've just made here. It's not going to cost me anything, of course. This is just a test run within a custom race. But yeah, if you don't make that pit stop, you will pick up a 1 second penalty. What we will do at the end of this run is add on that 8.8 seconds that it would have cost us within the pit lane to make that stop without changing the tyres and adjust the finishing time accordingly. So let's now discuss the car and the tyres and those lap times. Now you can see the tyre wear on the bottom right hand corner, not too dramatic to be perfectly honest with you, around about maybe approaching 20-25% on those left hand tyres. In terms of lap time, fairly consistent throughout the run. Fastest lap there a 129.6. We actually did a very nice lap on lap 12 there with the lower fuel, a 129.8. But the lap times towards the second half of the race kind of more in that kind of low 1 minute 30 bracket. 130.3 on lap 11, and I think we cross the line here with a 30.0. So as the tyres wear out and the fuel burns off, the lap times don't exponentially increase too much. The car more than drivable. Something like the Toyota 86 is pretty nice on its tyres, but 19 minutes 46.160 the finishing time for not changing tyres. Obviously I've adjusted that, added on the 8.8 seconds necessary to make it relevant. So let's compare that to now changing the tyres. Now if you go for the change tyre strategy, you basically would be kind of splitting the race down the middle in terms of like doing it in the optimal fashion. So 6 laps for your first stint, change the tyres, and then do 7 laps on the second stint with the lower fuel. This would give you the best quality of tyres for the longest period of the race. Let's be honest, if you kind of pit any earlier or pit early, you know, laps 2 or 3 and change the tyres, then you really gain no real benefit towards the end of the race, or certainly the benefit you would gain from the fresh tyres would be nowhere near as big as kind of doing the optimal split like we are doing here. If you go beyond lap 6, again, you probably just go into that territory where there's no point in changing the tyres, because you just run out of laps to kind of really use that advantage in the biggest possible way. So if you are going to change the tyres, I think lap 6 is your kind of optimal spot. You could maybe go a couple of laps earlier, just depending on the race circumstances, but yeah, lap 6 for changing the tyres if that is the way you go and you want to kind of take those 2.4 seconds for the benefit of the fresh tyres. And just how much benefit do you gain? So we were kind of doing some low 1 minute 30s with the older tyres. With the fresh tyres, we're comfortable in the 29s most of the time. A bit of an outlier there on lap number 10, a 130.7. We did kind of run into an AI car at the sort of kind of almost like 180 degrees left-hander, which cost us around about a second, so we will adjust for that on the finishing time. But you can see from the lap times, it's not a massive increase, or sort of not a massive gain with the fresh tyres over the worn tyres. Around about half a second the majority of the time. Are we going to gain that 2.4 seconds and more to sort of garner a quicker finishing time? And let's remember we need to take 1 second off that 1946, so that's a 1945.6 up against a 1946.1, so only half a second quicker changing those tyres. And obviously changing those tyres comes at a cost in a race that's going to be super tight. You're almost certainly going to be giving up track position to a couple of cars that haven't changed tyres on a circuit that's notoriously difficult to overtake. And yeah, you might have a tyre advantage, but you can see from the lap times here, as we compare the last 6 laps, it's not a massive lap time advantage that you've got, so it would be possible for a car on the worn tyres to defend and make your life very difficult indeed. But yeah, I just put this table up here to kind of sort of give you a visual representation of the difference between the lap times over the last 6 laps. You can see we gained 2.376 seconds with the fresh tyres, almost exactly what we lost in the pits to change those tyres, which would suggest on the face of it, it's just not worth making that change for the tyres. Now, one thing we have to remember though, is that is just me. Now, I'm a driver who's pretty decent on tyre wear. You may well be a driver who's not as good on tyres, so you may well stand to gain a little bit more with the fresh tyres than what we have gained here. So it's very difficult for me to just go, don't change the tyres, it's not worth it, because I don't know what sort of driver you are and how well you can look after the tyres and how well you can drive on worn tyres. So if you think, you know, that you will gain much more time than 2.4 or 3 seconds with the fresh tyres, then you probably have to then look at maybe actually making that tyre change, as you will stand to gain more, and it may well be a faster way to do the race overall compared to myself. So the question is, yeah, do you change tyres or not? As I just kind of outlined there, I think it does very much come down to what kind of driver you are. Now, in terms of the cars that people are going to be using here, I think you'll find the Renault Megane Trophy, the Toyota 86 that we were in, possibly the Alpha as well, although the Alpha is just notoriously difficult to drive. These are the kind of cars who are going to benefit most from not changing the tyre, just purely from being so good on the tyres. If you're a driver out there who maybe prefers driving something like the Scirocco or the Audi TT, both of which should be pretty handy around here, we know the FF cars are not great on tyres, then you may well want to take that 2.4 second loss just to have a car that you feel better driving or quicker driving, and then just having those tyres in good shape towards the end. But yeah, a difficult one to say don't change the tyres or not change the tyres. In terms of when is best to pit, because of that very short pit loss, if you're towards the front of the grid and make that mandatory pit stop very early, all you're going to do is come into traffic. If you're starting towards the front, you know, 3-4 positions, leave that pit stop towards the end. Middle of the pack is a kind of bigger decision or a more difficult decision to make. I would just pit whenever you find this sort of fighting with other cars getting too much, you need to get out the way of them. Towards the rear of the grid, obviously you can make that pit stop a little bit earlier, you're more likely to kind of then just drop behind the pack and get a little bit of clean air. That would be my kind of recommendations on the sort of best times to pit. If you're not changing the tyres, that is. If you are going to change the tyres, make sure you don't sort of pit any later than lap 6, because there will be no point in that. You'll be just kind of wasting the benefit of the fresh tyres, because you're going to give yourself so few laps to then use advantage of them. You could pit a little bit earlier than lap 6, but do remember, the earlier you pit, the more you negate the advantage of the fresh tyres towards the end of the race. So I think you could pit like lap 4. You know, you just kind of think, yeah, there's too much carnage going on in front of me, I'm going to pit in lap 4, I'm going to stick on a fresh set of tyres and then have better tyres towards the end, and that could be a strategy that could work. But yeah, I think if you are going to change the tyres, lap 6 is what you're looking at more often than not. Anyways, enough babbling, even I'm not sure what I'm talking about anymore. Let's get into a lap guide. Toyota 86 on the approach to turn number 1 at the Brands Hatch Grand Prix circuit. You're getting towards the number 1 board for turn number 1. It's best to go wide, throw the car in, carry as much speed through the corner as you can. The Parma Motorsport board or gantry for the hairpin. Get on the throttle nice and early. You can use that bit of track on the outside. We definitely didn't use as much as we could have there. Start of the curb on the right hand side is your braking reference for the left hander there. Easy to run wide, but again lots of track to use on the outside. The number 1 board for one of the most difficult corners on the track. I actually find this one of the most difficult corners in the game. Kind of very hard to get the speed and the radius and the turning in absolutely spot on, with the cars either not trying to kind of turn in a little bit too early or run wide on the exit. You're looking to get as close to the number 1 board here for the very fast right hander. You won't get all the way to the number 1 board, and it's the red splodge on the barrier on the left hand side as your reference here. There's a little bit of a dodgy curb there on the inside, can catch the inside wheel and pull the car round. Just sort of let off the throttle here, dab the brakes, roll the car in to this kind of off camber blind right hander. Number 1 board, the last board on the left hand side, is your reference for this left hander. Sorry I don't know the names of the corners. I know the names of all the corners in Brands Hatch. I'll get them wrong if I start saying them out loud here. And it's got a number 1 board on the left hand side of the track, or you'll see a kind of great patch of a tarmac as your braking reference for the tricky last corner of Brands Hatch. Do check out Tisney's guide though for a much more comprehensive and detailed and accurate lap guide of Brands Hatch. He is much better at that than me. I'm looking forward to this one. It should be an interesting race. It's going to be a very tight one, much like these mandatory pit stop races tend to be with Group 4, but it should be good fun. Join me for a live stream a little bit later in the week if you can. We'll try and take out some different cars depending on how the race is looking and unfolding. But yeah, should be good fun. Do join me for that if you can. Hopefully the guide has been useful in some way, shape or form. If it has, hit that like button. If it's a big steaming pile of rubbish, then hit that dislike button, because that's what it's there for at the end of the day. But yeah, enjoy this one folks, and I shall see you on the next one. Goodbye now.